the week with Charlie Marlowe, our exercise coordinator here. Charlie, what do you have for us today? Now, this is going to be something from the crazy territory. Is this going to be a machine? Is it a body weight? Is it a free weight? What is it?
So we're going to dial it back a little bit today.
Okay.
I know we've gotten a little crazy with the box jumps and everything. So
I like all the crazy ones, though. I think that's what started this whole thing, you know?
We're going to rein it in. So we're going to go free weight. And
Okay.
you can get crazy with free weight.
Of course.
So we're going to talk about the HEX bar deadlift today.
Okay.
So free weight exercise, the deadlift is a hip hinge exercise.
Right.
Glute, hamstring dominant. So that's where we're going to be spending our time today.
Dying to get into the hip hinge. I know you are. That's one of your favorite territories is the hip hinge, definitely.
Yeah.
So tell us about the HEX bar deadlift, man.
All right. So
and we're in deadlift territory. We could spend
that's
weeks
right.
on nothing but
and
deadlifts.
you know, as you've probably heard me and Josh talking, we're approaching the December.
Oh gosh, that's true. December's coming
up. So
October's coming up next month.
is even closer, but
exactly.
December is our favorite. So we'll be getting into that here pretty soon. A little bit of history about the HEX bar deadlift. So as I was telling you before we started this podcast.
This was amazing. Now,
Yes.
you're going to do the history on this, which I appreciate. And I did not realize this. Go for it,
Yeah,
please.
so this is something that both Garrett and I both were unaware of.
Yeah.
And so I've always used the trap bar, HEX bar terminology interchangeably, right?
Yeah.
I just thought it was the same thing, just
Absolutely.
a different name for it.
Sure.
It's actually not true. So originally, 1996, Al Gerald, who was a power lifter, came out with the trap bar. Okay. And what it was another way to perform a deadlift.
Right.
He had history with low back pain. So he was like, how can I modify this exercise to where I still get the benefit without the risk of low back pain?
Sure, okay.
So he designed this bar. Essentially, it was more of a diamond shape where he stood in this. In the center of the diamond.
Right.
And he held on to the handles onto the side of him.
Right.
Okay. And so the weight was distributed to the side. Rather, with a typical barbell, you're going to be standing behind the bar. The weight's going to be in front of you. So naturally, it's going to kind of pull you forward.
Right.
That's something you have to fight as you're pulling the weight up.
Sure.
So this invention was great.
Right.
It completely transformed his training. He was able to perform the deadlift with no back issues. And so it really revolutionized the way deadlifts were going.
And that was the original trap bar.
Trap bar, right.
So yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and so they're like, what
and
is
actually
this?
think about where the name trap bar came from. About, I'm sure you can dive into that. Why they called it a trap bar.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm not too sure. Do you know?
I actually do know that one.
Yeah,
So
I was about to
definitely.
say.
So because it was also used as a shrug device for the trapezius.
Yep.
So a lot of work. They probably show that in the video also
Mm-hmm.
because you still use that with the HEX bar.
Yeah.
So but that's why it was called a trap bar was because it was it basically looked like you were doing shrugs.
Yeah.
You know, and the way you were holding the bar and what have you, and that's why it originally was called that way, and used for that also,
Gotcha.
but not as much as for the deadlift.
Yeah, there's a ton of exercises you can use with this bar.
Absolutely.
We can maybe dive into that.
Yeah,
for a whole other
definitely. I'm
podcast.
sure you will.
Yeah. So he designed the trap bar, right? Well, there was one flaw with the trap bar, and it was because of its diamond shape. It was too narrow for larger size people that were using the bar. Athletes, people who had a larger base, and so later on, somebody designed what is now called the HEX bar.
Which we have a video, and you're going to use that in the video here when you're actually showing it. What you're going to see in the video is you're going to see the actual HEX bar. Because with the original trap bar, I don't even know. I guess you can still purchase those. Charlie and I were talking beforehand. He's never actually seen one. The first one I ever saw was a trap bar. It was not a HEX bar. And like we said, was used interchangeably. But anyway, just a note about the video you're about to see. Go ahead.
Yeah. Today's exercise of the week is the HEX bar deadlift. This exercise is a great tool to teach someone how to properly deadlift and hinge at the hips. To perform correctly, start with a shoulder width stance, bend through the knees and hips while maintaining a flat back. Breathe and brace your core, then drive your feet into the floor, keeping an upright posture. Hit us up if you have a question about this exercise or any others in our series. Yeah, so it's a hexagon shape. So rather than the diamond, it's a hexagon. So it's a little wider, and it allows for those larger based athletes to fit inside, and it's a little more comfortable, and the weight distribution is a little more favorable as well.
Right.
And so all around, it was just a better improvisation, if you will, to the trap bar. So the HEX bar is what we currently use. It's like you said, you don't see many trap bars anymore.
Right.
We have a HEX bar in the facility. It's in pretty much every weight room, I'd say, in college football, because it is a more favorable lift for for the athlete, personally, I think that's my favorite way to teach the deadlift, is start out with the hex bar.
Most of your well-apportioned free weight facilities, whether it's an athletic facility or just a regular gym, it's going to have pretty much a hex bar. And
so the difference between the hex bar deadlift and a straight bar deadlift, a barbell deadlift, is typically the hex bar deadlift is going to be a little more knee dominant because you're going to keep more of an upright torso, and you're going to use slightly less of a hip hinge than you would for your typical deadlift. The typical deadlift is going to be a little more hip dominant. And again, and what that means, it's all about how you distribute the weight. So if you're distributing the weight more posteriorly to the backside, that's going to be more of a hip dominant lift, versus if you're a little more upright, that's going to require more quad focus.
And the more quad focused is the traditional deadlift or the hex bar?
The hex bar. So the hex bar is going to be more quad focused. Traditional barbell deadlift is going to be more glute, hamstring,
mainly because of where the bar is. I mean, basically dragging it up the front of your leg. So
so it's all about the weight distribution. So same exercise, right? It's a deadlift, but the slight variation, it also kind of changes how the muscles are targeted.
And you can see in the video that basically the weights are. The weight is in the center line of the body, basically, instead of being slightly in the front of the body or behind the body in that matter. But it's more or less in the center line of the body. So that does change, like you're saying, it changes whether or not you're going to have the hip hinge, which muscles are involved, what have you. So
and so I'll kind of dive into some benefits now because that kind of segues well into that. So that's why I think the hex bar deadlift is a great teaching tool for helping someone learn how to deadlift properly. Starting out with a barbell, like you said, it kind of pulls you forward because the bar is in front of you. So that it can just naturally cause someone to establish some poor movement patterns. If you're leaning forward and you're hunched over trying to pick the bar up, that's just going to put your low back in a compromised position to where it could lead to injury. And, you know, we hear all the time, oh, well, my doctor said I can't do deadlifts because they're bad for me or something like that. Deadlifts aren't good, so I need to cut them out completely. Whereas we know people deadlift every day. When you're at home, you're picking up, a sandbag or picking up something in your garden.
The one I use all the time is if you've got a big dog. It's likely you're getting big bags of dog food. And so you're going to be doing a deadlift doing that. If you're doing any kind of gardening, picking up potting soil, any kind of lifting, and you've got a box on the floor, you're gonna commit to do a deadlift. But it was gonna make me ask you to remind everybody how important we joke about the deadlift a lot, mainly because you guys are addicted to them, you and Josh especially. But it's an extremely important lift, because basically for EDL, for everyday life. When you say, I didn't know if anything to add on that, but I mean that's why it's not just effective for athletes, effective for everyday life. So definitely.
Most definitely. So it's great for your general population because it's a movement pattern that we use every single day. But to get in the athlete side of things, the hex bar deadlift and the deadlift in general is a great exercise for what I like to talk about is in-season training. We've talked about that on the podcast. So training within season while you're participating in your sport. And the reason for that is because the hex bar deadlift starts out without an eccentric muscle contraction.
All right, break that down for us. You and I both know what that is, but
So the eccentric portion of the muscle contraction is the negative, if you will. So it's while the muscle is being contracted. So let's take a squat, for example. The negative portion of a squat. So if you start out the top, as you go down, that's the eccentric. And when you stand up, that's the concentric.
The eccentric I always described is what a lot of people think about as the easiest portion of the lift. It's when you're lowering the weight down and the weight is going back to rest. And so that most people think of it as easiest, but there's something neat about the eccentric contraction. About how important it is.
And the reason it's great for in-season training is because during the eccentric contraction is where the muscle's fibers actually have the micro tears that occur.
The most damage
damage is being done. It's also when you'll experience the most soreness. So anytime you do a lot of heavy eccentric work after a workout, you're typically going to be more sore those next few days if you do a lot of heavier eccentric training.
Well, and excuse me for interrupting, but anybody who's a fan of the podcast has heard me talk about DOMS, the late onset of muscle soreness, and it's one of the most famous studies that's ever been done in exercise physiology and kinesiology. But there's a very famous, there was a famous study that was done that was associated with that, talking about eccentric contractions, and where they actually had athletes, a bike would pedal itself, and they were trying to stop the bike themselves, so they were doing constant eccentric contractions, and they did so much damage to the muscle, one of the athletes actually died. And so if you're ever given the choice of lowering a weight continuously or lifting the weight continuously, eccentric contraction is going to do the most damage. That's why you're talking about where it's smart in the in season. Go back over that again. The smart in the in season to use this bar for this deadlift.
Yeah. So because you're only training that concentric portion of the lift, the positive part, the exploding up, it's great because you're going to reduce muscle soreness. So you're not going to experience as much soreness, as much fatigue, which is great because let's say you're working out on a Monday or Tuesday. If you have a game later in the week, Thursday, Friday, you don't want to be sore 2 days later, right? Because that's typically when we experience that DOMS, is that 2 days after the workout. So you don't want to be going into competition sore. So by doing this exercise, you're still going to be training your strength, your power, your speed, but you're also not having the negative side effects of the soreness and the fatigue that's going to decrease your performance. Doing that
more or in-depth damage, or it's actually strengthening, but it is damaging to the muscle. And at the same time, though, you're able to train in season. You're going to stop atrophy and also actually make some gains.
Oh yeah,
and you've talked about that before, about the fact that most people in season stop training. That's the wrong thing to do. You want to continue training through in season.
Not having just that maintain mindset, but you can make gains in season. This is one of the exercises that you can use to do that. That's not going to negatively impact your performance.
Tell us about some tips and stuff about using the hex bar for the deadlifts.
So I'll say this one till I'm blue in the face, because I think it's a tip that just needs to be constantly reminded. And that's the whole idea of breathing and brace. So breathe, brace, take a deep breath, fill your belly with air. And that's just going to create pressure within your abdomen. So that way, whenever you go to pull something up, you're not folding over. I've talked about the wet noodle illustration before. You don't want to be like limp, like a wet noodle. You want to be tight. You want to be firm, so when you go to pick something up, there's no bend in your back. Your abs stay tight, and so that compression throughout your spine is very important because it's going to help prevent any issues. So breathing and brace.
It's a safety mechanism.
It's a safety, and so it's just a constant reminder before you go to pick something up. And again, this isn't just in the gym. This is when you go to pick up your dog food. This is when you go to pick up your kid. Whenever you think about it, it's just going to eventually become second nature. And so that's what we're trying to just ingrain that into our brains. Another one is just keeping your hips down. A lot of times when people go to pick something up, the first thing I see is their hips are the first thing that comes up. And so automatically that puts them just in a compromised position, because the next thing that has to come up is they're picking up from their back. And so what I try to think about is just first thing up is your head. So keep the head above the hips. Don't let your hips come up above your head. And if you do that, you're going to be fine. Just to make sure your hips aren't the first thing that come up. And
basically lead with your head and shoulders coming up front
lead
straight.
With the head and shoulders.
You see that in the video, the way that's being done. But they're leading with their head and their shoulders. Their hips aren't coming up first. So
and the last thing is, whenever you're doing this exercise, just try not to bounce the weight off the floor. I know it looks cool and it sounds cool, but you're kind of taken away from the exercise, because in a way it's cheating in a sense, because you're not getting the full effect, I'd say, of the exercise. So slow and controlled is best, because you want to go down all the way to the floor, kind of pause in between, and then stand up. And again, you're just going to get the biggest bang for your buck. If you're bouncing the weights, it's also a risk injury, because that's a big jarring through your whole body whenever that weight slams. So that's just something else to consider whenever you're doing this exercise.
But of course, and there's been times, and I'm sure you've used them before with the hex bar, when you've done explosive part on the positive, but you're controlled on the negative. You're not bouncing the weight. You're basically coming up and you're using that for like a plyometric effect.
Most definitely.
Am I right that I've seen y'all sometimes actually do plyometric exercises with it?
So like I said, there's plenty of things you can do with this equipment. And so doing some loaded jumps like we talked about with the box jump. So I mean, I wouldn't recommend doing a box jump with a hex bar, but just doing a loaded jump, that's a great way to load it up heavier and to work that power side of the spectrum.
Right.
So we do that a lot, and we do eccentric focused deadlifts. You know, if you're not in season, or if you're just you know, an everyday client, everyday athlete that wants to train the deadlift, the hip hinge, then training that portion of the lift is going to naturally carry over and make your overall deadlift better. And so, you know, we'll work some negatives, so 5 to 10 seconds of just controlling it down, and really emphasize, because you can go heavier, you're stronger in the eccentric portion of the muscle contraction. So,
and I really didn't. I'm glad you're saying that, because I didn't mean to beat up the eccentric contractions. We're big fans of eccentric contractions here, and in fact, if you don't do your eccentric contraction correctly, you're losing about 60% of your lift. The benefit of your lift by not doing the eccentric contraction. But in-season athletes, what we were talking about as far as that goes. No, eccentrics are fantastic. So, what else to add? Anything else on this one?
I'd say that's it. I mean, again, with deadlifts, it is important just to really focus on form. I think they get a bad rap because people just don't understand that there's a right way to do it, you know. And I think you'll see in the video, you know, we'll show, all right, this is how to break the form down properly. We'll give you some great tips on how to do that, and just you know, it's a good reminder, you know, as you do that exercise.
Absolutely, and the HEX bar makes it a lot safer to do. I mean, a lot easier. I think a lot easier to do, actually conduct the exercise, especially for beginners doing the deadlift. And you know, we can't leave without saying it. It makes a great Father's Day gift, wouldn't you say?
That's right. Yeah.
A HEX bar, you know, ladies, if you need something for your dad, you know, or for your husband or whatever, Father's Day, you know, HEX bar. Yeah, we go that way. So, Charlie, anything else to add?
Nope.
Fantastic. Listen, if you have any more questions about this, and you can go on all day talking about deadlifts, this is one way of doing it. With using the HEX bar is a fantastic tool. But if you have any questions about it, please don't think twice about reaching out to Charlie at charlie@personalizedfitness.com. You can also reach him at 251-341-0927. HEX bar deadlift, very safe and effective tool. So very safe and effective exercise. And one more way we help you reach the level of wellness. Thank you so much for joining me today, man. We'll see y'all next time.